Dawn of the Dead changed how James Gunn looked at remakes in general, who first believed they were unnecessary for successful films. Welcome to Stats In. If you're just joining us, please subscribe and don't forget to turn on notifications bell for more video. James Gunn has always been of the opinion that films that had a great run during their initial release do not require remakes. However, Zack Snyder's Dawn of the Dead, which the former wrote, gave him a bold new perspective on what remakes could achieve even for films that had nothing to fix with another iteration. Dawn of the Dead was a film that Zack Snyder and James Gunn worked on together, with Gunn serving as the screenwriter for the remake, and Snyder directing the whole project. While Gunn was not very keen on the idea of remakes, the director revealed that Dawn of the Dead was a notable exception. First, I was hesitant about doing a remake. I used to think that remakes of movies that were successful in their original versions were unnecessary, but for some reason I was lit up by Dawn of the Dead. I could see a different take on the same subject, with more survivors and more of a focus on surviving in a world where the rules have totally changed. I also saw a chance to do something in the horror genre that was very different from the teen romps of the past few years. Tonally, it's a return to the great, gritty horror films of the 70s, aligned modern-day special effects and a sizable budget. James Gunn's novel approach to remakes made Dawn of the Dead, which was Zack Snyder's feature directorial debut, one of the best films in the director's filmography. It is ironic to think about the interview back in 2001, as James Gunn is now soft rebooting a universe that Zack Snyder put into motion over at WB. In an interview in 2001, James Gunn talked about his distaste for needless remakes, saying that a good product might not need a second shot at success after all. However, while working on Zack Snyder's Dawn of the Dead, the director realized that a remake might not just be a fix-it, but also a medium to enhance the story in a way in which it can create a new perspective. He said, "While more often than not, there comes along a film that updates an old project in the best way possible, like Robert Eggers' Nosferatu, there is a slew of bad remakes, usually jumping mediums, that manage to not only upset fans but also create a combative relationship between the studio and the films that they produce. Hollywood's biggest studios have decided to hedge their bets with reboots, remakes, and legacy projects rather than focusing on making original content. Some of the top-performing films in recent years have been franchise films that have given the audience some kind of nostalgia. There have been a lot of calls from fans for original content, but as long as the money keeps flowing toward remakes, reboots, and reimaginings, there is little that the industry giants in Hollywood can do." Zack Snyder's Rebel Moon director cuts were a result of some savvy negotiations with Netflix. Welcome to Stats In. If you're just joining us, please subscribe and don't forget to turn on notifications bell for more video. Zack Snyder's time with DC may be a thing of the past. However, he continues to work on epic franchises, with his original creation, Rebel Moon, having seen the release of 2 movies already. The talented director has every intention of converting Rebel Moon into a space opera franchise, much like the likes of Star Wars and Star Trek. However, what sets his franchise apart is the fact that despite the 2 movies not getting an R rating, they have received respective Snyder cuts that are full of gore, violence, and everything else one can expect from an R-rated franchise. Regardless, as it turns out, the talented director had to undergo a fair share of negotiations to make his Snyder cuts a reality. He revealed that it was a barter between him and Netflix that allowed the 2 movies thus far to have both a PG-13 version and an R-rated Zack Snyder version. In an interview with Real Blend podcast, Zack Snyder discussed the reasoning behind the director's cut and how it came to be. He explained that Netflix, although not burdened by box office concerns, sought a version of the movie that would appeal to a broader audience. This led to the development of a more commercially viable PG-13 version with a runtime of around 2 hours. Well, there was a conversation around the rating and the runtime where they felt like we could make a slightly more commercial version of this movie if we kept the rating to PG-13 and the runtime to right around 2 hours. However, this commercial cut wasn't the movie Snyder had initially envisioned. Known for his darker, more mature themes, Snyder had written Rebel Moon as an R-rated film. The negotiations with Netflix resulted in a compromise. While the streaming platform would get its PG-13 version, Snyder would also be able to release his original R-rated director's cut. So that was like a conversation that we just felt like based on their data that would be more viewable. And so I was like, okay, so that was part of the negotiation. I had written definitely an R-rated movie, and so it was a conversation like, hey, if we say yes, is there a way is a PG-13 version of this movie could happen? And I was like, absolutely. The director's cut of the 2 movies allowed Snyder to maintain an in-depth exploration of the narrative and characters, elements that had to be trimmed in the PG-13 version. Snyder communicated with his cast about the different cuts, ensuring that they understood what would be included in each version. The R-rated cut promises to stay true to Snyder's established storytelling style, offering fans a closer look at his original vision. Despite the compromises made for commercial viability, Snyder's creative vision for Rebel Moon remains largely intact. The director meticulously planned the different cuts, ensuring that the PG-13 versions met Netflix's requirements while the R-rated cuts retained the depth and intensity of his original script. And while his latest two movies have not performed as well as he would have hoped, the director's cuts did improve the overall experience and resulted in a darker, gorier narrative, the kind of which Snyder's fans are more accustomed to. All versions of the two Rebel Moon movies are available to be streamed on Netflix. Of course, the approach is not new for the director, who has previously released lauded directorial cuts of movies such as Justice League, Watchmen, and now parts 1 and 2 of Rebel Moon. Despite two different versions of Rebel Moon being released, one scene from Watchmen seems to gain the top spot in his work for Zack Snyder. Welcome to Stats In. If you're just joining us, please subscribe and don't forget to turn on notifications bell for more video. Zack Snyder is one of the most fascinating directors in Hollywood right now. While his films are blockbuster-scale action epics, they get an extremely divisive response, and each project's acclaim differs. After hitting it out of the park with Army of the Dead, Snyder came back with the negatively received space opera Rebel Moon. Filmmaker Zack Snyder has some amazing visuals to boast of in his filmography, even if the films themselves have been divisive. Be it Superman's flight in Man of Steel or the incredible opening montage in Watchmen, the man knows how to create jaw-dropping imagery that turns superheroes into gods. While there are many to boast of, Snyder recently revealed what his favorite scene to shoot in the latest Rebel Moon films was. The filmmaker released an R-rated director's cut for both chapters of the space opera on Netflix and revealed that he was excited for fans to watch the R-rated version of his favorite scene in an interview with The Hollywood Handle. Snyder spoke about multiple details in the sci-fi film series and the upcoming projects in the franchise. Responding to a fan question about his favorite scene to shoot in Rebel Moon, he said, "Korra fighting the guys in the barn, killing all the Imperial guys in the barn. That felt old school. It was like old school fighting and shooting and really just going, shot to shot, and really telling that story was really fun. And I can't wait for you to see the R-rated version of it." The scene in question sees Korra, played by Sofia Boutella, barge into a barn where a group of Imperial soldiers are holding a few villagers hostage. Many fans criticized the scene for its overuse of slow motion and lack of blood. The two-part saga saw a Star Wars-inspired story of rebels who go against an intergalactic empire after their home world is threatened. Released on Netflix last year, the films gained the top spot on the platform's top 10 for weeks but were not well received by critics. Snyder released an R-rated director's cut of both the films on August 2nd. While the film has plenty of memorable sequences,